All right. Welcome to Blogging Heads. I'm Pascal-Emmanuel Gobry. I'm here with Adam Gurri, and we're going to talk about Santa because it's Christmas. So gather ye round, little kids. All right, Adam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, um, yeah, I'm Adam Gurri, write for a few places, The Week, The Federalist, the Umlaut, and I feel very strongly that, you know, Santa ought to be defended from this impunity to his
From his
enemies.
enemies.
Um, so, if you don't mind, I could just launch into it.
Yeah, let's hear. So the context for everyone else is that I wrote a piece called "Kill Santa," which is a piece that I write every year, saying that parents should not lie to their kids about Santa. And Adam disagrees. He even changed his Twitter avatar to troll me. So okay, so let's hear your defense of Santa.
All right, well, I think so. Starting with your argument, which I guess boils down to a Business Insider piece you wrote in 2010. I noticed.
Yep.
Um, it's
As I said, I write it every year.
yeah. Well, it essentially goes. It's pretty straightforward. Lying is wrong. Parents have to lie to say that Santa is real, so that's wrong. A. B. Like the defense that it's just storytelling. It's not really lying. Uh, just doesn't cut it. C. Like the kids are going to find out eventually, and that'll erode trust with the parents. Uh, so that it's not even for the practical purposes for the parents. It's not worth it. Um, and the argument that it's tradition doesn't really cut it either because there have been a lot of bad traditions. So just saying it's tradition on its face doesn't really excuse it. Um, and the fact that a lot of parents want to do it mostly just because they find it fun is a very selfish justification. So would you say that's a fair summary of your position?
That's a fair summary. I could go on for quite a bit, but let's first hear your response.
All right. Well, I think I'm in both a good position and a bad one. I'm in a good position because everyone wants sort of, an excuse to be let off the hook for saying that Santa is real. So there's that. But then again, I also put myself in the position of being a lie apologist here. So, that's a little troubling, a bit of a challenge. Um, but my feeling is this. One, I'm not a Kantian. I don't think lying is categorically wrong. I'm pretty persuaded by the, classic example of you don't have to be honest with the murderer at the door who's asking where his murder victim is. Um,
Right.
of course, telling your kid about Santa seems fairly small and trivial compared to that example, but I think that example just serves to show there are some cases where being honest is not a virtue necessarily, or the most important virtue. Um, so the question is, what's the line? When I think about parenting, the questions that I have are, what is a healthy relationship between parents and their kids? Uh, how can the parent help their child to grow up to be a healthy, fully functioning adult to the extent that they even can influence that? Um, and in my mind, something like the Santa story is, if done right, and it can be done wrong, just something fun between parents and their kids. Um, More than that, since it is a tradition, it gives the kids a shared experience with a lot of other people who grew up when they did, and across generations since it's been around for so long. Um, I do think that just pressing the point can be pointless and counterproductive. If a kid strongly insists that they don't believe Santa is real, trying to strong arm them by saying, well, kids only get presents if they believe he's real,
Right.
is, not the way to go. But I sort of agree with Michael Doherty, I think,
Yep.
um, who said, within reason, it's a perfectly healthy, nice, fun way for kids and parents to celebrate Christmas each year. And in my experience, which isn't necessarily limited, it's not harmful. The erosion of trust that you talk about seems in principle like something that could happen. It's not something I've ever seen happen. Um, in my experience, what happens is there's no sort of like moment of revelation where kids realize they've been lied to. Most of the time, it's just sort of a gradual awareness that comes about that, this is actually just a story they're being told. Um, and I feel like that's a perfectly healthy development. But I've said enough. I'll let you pick up.
Yeah. So about the lying thing, I'm not a Kantian either, but I am a Christian, and that makes me a principles-based moralist, which means that I do believe that there are some things that are uh, intrinsically wrong and that should not be done, even even to justify something else. And with regard to lying, I mean, lying, it's one of the mortal sins in the Decalogue. You can make the argument, the Benjamin Constant argument about the murderer at the door, but Santa Claus is not a murderer at the door. It's there. There's no end to justify the means, and I do think it's important. I do, I do want to be a little bit of a Grinch in the sense that I do think that one of the problems in our current society, in our current discourse, is consequentialism. Well, what's wrong about it? It doesn't hurt anybody. Well, there are some things like lying that are wrong, regardless of the circumstances. And you know, I do think that's true in general. I certainly think it's true in terms of the relationship from a parent to a child. If you want to tell your children that some things are wrong, period, you should at least do your best to set a good example. And so I guess most parents would say to their children that lying is wrong. Well, I think they shouldn't lie to their children. With regard to the consequences, so I mean, everybody brings in their own personal experience about this. I say, it can undermine the trust in the parent. It can undermine the trust in Christianity. If you're a Christian parent and you want to teach your kids about Jesus, uh, you know, saying, the old fat man who magically brings gifts, that was made up, but the magic Jesus, that's totally real, is not a winning argument. And people, well, typically respond, well, when I was growing up, I didn't have a problem with it. And this is why I point out that I write this piece every year, and I have been writing it for several years. I did get a bunch of testimonies from people who said that finding out Santa wasn't real was traumatic for them, either because it eroded the trust of the parents, or because it eroded faith in Christianity, or because it just it just crushed them. I mean, not completely crushed them, but there are I get testimonies from them. There are people for whom that's bad, and the question then becomes, for you as a parent, do you want to take the chance that your kid is going to be in one of those buckets? Because okay, it went fine for you, but that is no guarantee that it's going to go fine for your kids. And again, there's just there's nothing on the other side of the equation. Like, it's not, you're taking a risk for what? For nothing. With regard to the fact that it's a fun tradition, uh, I just don't see it. I mean, again, I'm a Christian. I do think that there's, other stories you can talk about too around Christmas time that are a lot better, like Jesus and the Magi and I mean, the Christmas story is wonderful, and there's a sort of secular version of that story that's about family and getting together. I think it's more beautiful to say we give each other gifts because we love each other than to say the gifts are brought by Santa. Uh, yeah, and maybe we can talk about some of the other aspects, especially the fact that it's very often, not always. I get in trouble for people saying I insult parents. Not always, but sometimes, often, it's a way of looking down on kids. But maybe we can talk about that later, and I'll shut up now and let you talk.
Sure. No, well, I'm not a consequentialist either, and I strongly dislike consequentialist philosophies. Um, but, while not saying that consequences are everything, I think we both agree that consequences matter to an extent. You yourself bring up the fact that you've talked to people for whom there were bad consequences of this, essentially. And I think that if we could demonstrate that, 80%, 100% of kids who were lied to about Santa, could never had serious trust issues for the rest of their lives, no one would be defending this practice. But I don't think that's the case, and I think there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, as with everything. And I know that you're sick to death of personal anecdotes whenever you discuss this, but you do invite it on yourself by talking about this every year, so I'm going to go for it. We actually already talked about this on Twitter, but when I was a kid, my father had this game he would play with me where when he traveled for work and he'd come back with some gift from the place, like a mini Eiffel Tower or something, he would say that he had a shrink ray that he would bring with him to, these trips. And this was not like a miniature. It was actually the shrunken Eiffel Tower that he would give me. And, I would argue with him, but I would also, as a very little kid, I would very much want to believe that this was a possible thing. And it was a fun thing between me and him. And, just sort of, and Michael Dougherty talks about this too in his piece. There's like a suspension of, well, this probably isn't real, but, you can imagine the possibility, especially when you're a kid, and it's fun to imagine those possibilities. And I personally would, this did not erode my faith in my dad, or my trust in him. It did, it did lead me to understand that there were times when he was yanking my chain, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. And it's very contextually defined to these specific, silly, fun things. This is not like, he doesn't joke around, he doesn't horse around when it comes to major life important things. So that said, that's just my experience. If we found that most parents were really bad at this Santa thing, or most kids just couldn't get it and all had those traumatic experiences, I would say, absolutely, you're right. We shouldn't do this. But my feeling is you're selling it short by saying there's nothing on the other side of the equation. There's actually quite a few things. One is that sort of connection and that sense of whimsy and that sense of possibilities that you have when you're a kid, and the shared experience of it with your parents. But another is just, on Twitter you said that we really want to try and create a society of people who would not go, give us the typical results of the Milgram experiment, where essentially everyone just bows to authority. And you propose the idea that by getting a kid to resist the reality of Santa when all of his peers are arguing otherwise, you're helping to, promote that. But the Milgram experiment isn't about peers. The Milgram experiment is about deference to authority. And if your parent is the one saying, no, all your peers are wrong, that's the authority. So I don't actually think it helps. I don't think it helps in that dimension. By the way, saying that we're trying to create a society of people resisting the Milgram experiment is another argument by consequences, I will point out at this point. In any case, I don't think it would actually uh, I don't think it would actually help us resist the Milgram experiment. And it does give up something else, which I think is very important in this sort of highly commercial, globalized, modern world, which is it creates a sense of shared uh, place with other people, a cultural connection between those who grew up being told by their parents that Santa exists and them. It's something small, I'll grant you. It's definitely not on the order of magnitude of the murder at the door. But I think it's important. I think little things like that add up. I've been going on for a while now, so.
So on the personal experience front, since you brought it up, my parents were virulently anti the Santa lie, um, and you know, yeah, it does teach you to. I mean, you talk about the Milgram experiment. Uh, it's the fable of the emperor with no clothes, right? Everybody is telling you that something that everybody knows is impossible, or that is obviously impossible, is true. And actually, social pressure and conformity and so on make it extremely hard to point out that the emperor has no clothes, to point out that it's impossible for one dude to bring gifts to billions of households in one night via reindeer. Um, and so those moments where 99% of everyone will, affirm that the naked emperor has beautiful clothes, it's very important for our society to educate people who are able to say, "Hey, no, the emperor is naked," and that's the experience I've had, and it was a very profitable experience. I mean, people who follow me on Twitter know that I'm, not cowed by social conformity when it comes to expressing unconventional or unpopular opinions. Uh, without stroking myself too much, I think it's socially valuable to have people who do that. And so you can talk about the Milgram. I think that the Milgram experiment is about authority, but it's also about conformity. It's about doing what you're told. It's about fitting in. In the Milgram experiment, you have to take a personal risk to sort of overcome your ingrown um gregarious instinct and say, no, I'm not going to do this. Um so that's and I do think it's important. And I would point out a second point here, which is sort of connected. Uh, you know, I'm a Roman Catholic, and one reason why I'm a Roman Catholic is because Roman Catholic theology believes in truth. It believes in objective truth. In Roman Catholic theology, Aquinas says all knowledge is noble, truth cannot contradict truth, so there is a huge space for philosophy, a huge space for science, and the reason why you should believe things is because they're true, and you should find out whether things are true or not. The reason you should believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead is not because it makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside to think that he rose from the dead. It's because it's a historical fact that he rose from the dead, at least according to, I mean, what insert caveat here, but that's the idea anyway. And so it is wrong to make people believe that things are true which are not true. Uh, and and I and for Christians and especially Catholics to pretend otherwise is baffling to me. So with regard to what's on the other side of the equation, with the whimsy, the shared experience, there's often this idea, oh, you want kids to have wonder, or why are you a Grinch, blah blah blah. I have nothing against stories. I have nothing against wonder, whimsy, and that's the thing I pointed out in many of my things. You see kids playing at Lord of the Rings all the time. You see kids playing at Narnia all the time. You see kids playing at Paddington the Bear all the time. You never see kids playing at being Santa. Because what creates whimsy, what creates imagination, what creates wonder, and all those wonderful things is stories. And the reason why it's wonderful for children is because they know their stories. And that's what creates the imagination. That's what liberates them to invent variations on it, to put themselves in the story, to play at it, and so on. And that's what creates the whimsy, the imagination that is so wonderful. And, it's not. And the Santa lie actually goes against that because you're not telling them a story the way you would with, Puss in Boots or whatever. You're telling them that this is a fact and not a story, and so it goes against it. And with regard to the fact that it's a shared experience, I mean, if you and I went out and killed a vagrant, that would be a shared experience as well. I mean, it's nice to have shared experiences, but we should also talk about the content of the shared experience. Like, it's nice for people to have shared experiences, and there are plenty of shared experiences around Christmas. Like everyone has this shared, or everyone, not everyone, but plenty of people have the shared experience of being with their family at Christmas, with giving and receiving gifts at Christmas, with singing songs. And again, that's before you add the Christian piece, which is about the coming of Jesus and all the rest, which is, from a Christian perspective, much more important than Santa. So again, I just don't see, I just don't, there's no there.
Well,
And I'm done for now.
I feel it's unfortunate because I'm not Christian, so I would love to engage you on that level, but that would just be patronizing.
Right.
That would just be patronizing. And certainly, obviously, like the shared experience of going to church together, and as you say, just opening presents together, that excitement, that's definitely there. But I'm gonna press my point here. I think there is something wonderful, and I know you disagree, and I don't know that there's a way for me to, from our different vantage points, different religious commitments, for me to make the case to you. But I think there's something wonderful about the suspension of disbelief, the what if, that comes from doing the Santa Claus story right. Especially in this day and age when any kid from 5 years old or even younger could just Google it if they wanted to. Sort of having a gentle touch, leaving open the possibility that Santa is real. I think it's silly to just bluntly argue to your kid, no, Santa is definitely real. You have to believe it. I mean, I think that's just silly. And people who press that point, and as Michael said, people who try and use Santa to blackmail their kids to be being good in December, that's absurd.
Well, a lot of people do that.
No, I know, and they shouldn't. That's silly. You should tell your kids to be good all the time. They shouldn't have to just be good to get presents on Christmas.
Yeah.
I think we can agree on that. But walking this line where we suggest that something that seems impossible could be possible, I don't have anything against people who don't want to do that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it, personally. And I understand that you categorically commit to the idea that the sheer untruth of it, and even suggesting that it is true, is wrong. but I don't share that commitment. I think honesty is important, um, but I don't think that the that walking the line with Santa is either harmful or wrong. Um, and I do think that rituals matter, shared rituals matter. I agree that we should care about the content of those rituals. Um, you know, I don't think that making a ritual of going out and killing vagrants every year would be a very moral idea. Or
You don't think about the whimsy, man.
um, but I frankly I think it's the the skirting the line of honesty is harmless and not unvirtuous. Um, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. I think a lot of people should think about this a lot more carefully than they do. Um, but I just, there's something magical about it, and it's not just for the parent. I understand. We can come to this point now. I don't think that parents should do this for selfish reasons. I think that if they do it, it should be with the child in mind. And if you can argue that it's going to be nothing but harmful or counterproductive for the child, then I don't think you should do it. But I don't think that that is true. Um, and as for the Milgram experiment stuff,
Yeah.
um, I mean, there's another balancing act that has to be performed there as well, right? Because there's sort of two issues that you need to think of, especially these days. So, on the one hand, you have sort of the story of liberation of sort of Enlightenment liberalism, right? Which would absolutely say that battling conformity is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing. And that point of view has brought us a lot of great things. Deidre McCloskey believes that it plays a huge role in, kicking off the Industrial Revolution, for instance. Um, and that narrative is sort of the anti-Milgram experiment. And it's part of why Milgram himself thought there was no way that as many people were going to follow the orders of the experimenters as ended up doing so. But on the other hand, we sort of the liberation story is itself just a story. All tools we have for resisting bad conformity come from good conformity. Conformity to the values instilled in us by our parents, as we're talking about.
So are you saying we should question wrong stories then?
Say again?
Are you saying we should question stories that are wrong? Like the story of enlightenment liberation from conformity?
Oh, and I think we should think about it critically. I think there's something to the liberation story. I just don't think it stands on its own. Um,
So we should think critically about the enlightenment narrative of progress, but we shouldn't think critically about flying magic fat men.
no, we should accept that on faith. No, no, but I think that if you do it right, it works out that way.
I was just snarking.
No, I know,
Go on.
I get it. No, I think that the right way to do it does encourage that, though. You you don't just categorically say to your kid, "No, Santa is real," but you sort of suggest that he is. You don't back down on it. Um, Most kids that I know, especially growing up, it was a subject of intense conversation, right? It was, well, is he really real, though? There were always a bunch of kids who thought that he was not really real. There were always your sort of Pascal's wager kids who were like, well, maybe he's not real, but if he's not, I'll get presents for believing in him or whatever. Um, you know, there's actually like a good Calvin and Hobbes about that. Um, and then there were the kids who really believed it, and it was a subject of conversation. Now I can only imagine what it's like now that everyone has the internet, um, which they didn't back then. Uh, it actually presents a story for critical examination, um, So I think it is actually healthy in that way as well. But I mean, again, it's hard. We can't. There's no, not to my knowledge, there are no systematic studies of the effect of the Santalai on children in the long term. So there probably is.
Well, no, because you need a control group, and the Centilai is universal.
Right. Um, so we only have our own experiences when we're talking about this stuff. Um,
Well, that's actually an important point. When you don't have good empirical evidence, the next best thing is to retreat back to first principles, like lying is wrong.
well, that's where we differ. When we don't have good evidence, my de facto is to retreat to what Edmund Burke would call the bank and capital of nations and ages, which is essentially the tacit knowledge embedded in living traditions. Um, I don't think that traditions are free from critical scrutiny, but I do think there's a lot of wisdom in them, and I do think that they should be the starting place. And in fact, in practice, they're always the starting place, right? Um, the first principles you speak from are imparted to us through tradition.
Yeah, I'm a Burkean as well, but I think it's when it comes to education in particular, I think that most of the wisdom we have is bad, uh, and by the way, I don't think that our principles are bequeathed to us by tradition. Again, I'm a sorry for bringing it back all the time. I'm sorry, but I'm a Roman Catholic. I believe in natural law. I believe that morality has objective existence independently of our subjective understandings of it. But never mind that.
Well, no, could I comment on that for a second?
Sure.
I am not going to dispute that or argue for or against it one way or the other, but I don't think you can dispute that the way you actually learn of first principles is from books, from people who learned about it, from books, from people who learned about it, from books, from people, so on and so on. That's all I mean when I'm saying it's imparted by tradition. There are living practices. Whether or not you believe these practices are are responding to some underlying metaphysical, real, natural law situation, the mechanism by which it gets imparted to us is through community and through living tradition.
I I don't think it's exclusively the case. I think I'm not particularly well informed about it, but I would bet my left hand that there were Aztecs who believed that human sacrifice was wrong, that you did not need to feed the sun with the blood of an innocent person, even though that's what their society told them, because they had access to universal moral principles. But that's that we're getting off track. I I was going to say something else, but I completely forgot.
Sorry.
What was the point you originally made?
Well, it was about the knowledge embedded in traditions.
Right. Yeah. I'm a Burkean when it comes to social structures writ large. I'm not a Burkean when it comes to education. It's good that we got rid of the tradition that of the 18th century and 19th century that said that children, right after they were born, had to be handed off to a nanny and raised away from their parents until they were 10. I think that tradition was wrong. And I think that it relied on a flawed understanding of human nature. And this is actually for me the point that underlies everything, which is, um, are children full human beings or not? Uh, there's part of our discussion is what's the presumption? Is it a presumption in favor of Santa or not? You know, there's this thing that exists, unless you can prove that it causes lots of harm, then let's continue doing it. As someone who identifies as a conservative, I think there's a lot of wisdom to that approach in general. But the thing is, if there was no Santa lie, I don't think children would be worse off. And I don't think anybody can argue that. And if somebody suggested doing it, everybody would think that that person was crazy, right? And the, the there's something problematic to me when we sort of assume that parents even have the right to mislead people for fun. Uh, we don't believe in such a right to other people, right? If I do a prank on you that causes you to suffer some harm, I trick you into believing something, and you drive across the country or something. I manipulate you to doing something to have fun at your expense. That's immoral because you have dignity as a human being, and I shouldn't treat you like a toy. Um, are children full human beings? I mean, I believe that they are, and I believe that one of the biggest problems with the education of children all throughout history is that most parents do not treat children as full human beings. They treat them as sort of little animals, little. And there are degrees, right? There's a spectrum. I don't want to be too. Uh, I don't want to insult every parent on the planet, but I do think that at least at the level of the culture and at the level of our sort of embedded worldview assumptions, it's a very, very strong thing. It's a very strong thing. It's a very strong thing to think that children have less dignity than adults. And I don't think that's true. And I think that the best thing that could happen for education in general is for people to change that mindset. And if people had the mindset that children are full human beings, nobody would even argue for a second. Everybody would say, hey, wait a second. You know, manipulating people for fun is actually immoral. Uh, and, it gets dressed up in this stuff about whimsy and tradition and all the rest. But, you know, for most parents, it's either a form of control or a form of entertainment. And, you can say, oh, there are wrong ways to do it and good ways to do it. Well, the best way to do it is to get to a place where everybody treats children as full human beings. And once we get to that place, nobody will think that the Santa lie is credible. Uh,
Well, that's interesting. So, um, what's interesting to me about that is that most of the arguments that I've seen from the anti-Santa side go the opposite route. Pamela, my good friend Pamela Hobart, um, likes to argue that there's a very asymmetrical relationship between parents and kids. Um, which parents, so we need to sort of scrutinize that relationship pretty closely and critically because it's not like kids are going to be able to do it for themselves. Um, uh, it's the relationship is sort of not what Mike Munger and Sam Wilson would call voluntary, which is to say, it's not like the kid is in a situation where if they are with a bad parent, they can recognize, they have the information to recognize it. They have the ability to go, all right, I'm going to swap you out for a parent that doesn't tell me about Santa. Um, you know, and you know, that actually, they have a great blog, You Voluntary Exchange. I definitely recommend it, where they sort of look at the degrees of voluntariness and coercion.
If there's a kid who says that, I will definitely adopt him. If there's a 5-year-old somewhere who says, I want to get a Santa-free parent, I'm taking that kid. I'm saying it on the record. Sorry for interrupting.
Get that on the record, okay. Um, but my opinion is, if we treated kids like full human beings, the argument against Santa would shrink, not increase, because most of the argument is that kids don't know better. They don't have the experience. They haven't developed the either the critical faculties or the literal cognitive, biological brain faculties yet. In order to be able to identify this as sort of like a dance that the parents are playing. And I joke around with my adult friends all the time. Usually they can tell from my tone and from the way I'm acting that I'm yanking their chain. Or, I do it in such a way that the whole joke is that they can't tell if I'm messing with them. And that's fine, and that's an understood part of our relationship, and they enjoy it, and I enjoy it, and they do it to me all the time as well. And it seems to me that if we're treating kids like full human beings, we can develop that sort of relationship with them as well. I actually do think there's something to Pamela and the new voluntary type argument that kids are a special case where you need to take extra care. But I agree, we should treat them like full human beings with full dignity, and develop a similar sort of relationship to them as we would with any full human being.
Yeah, I think I think there's a confusion between dignity and ability. I don't deny that small children typically have lower cognitive abilities than adults, although in almost every case, not as low as the adults think.
No, we definitely overblow.
But it's a matter of dignity, meaning, if one believes that there is something called intrinsic dignity that attaches to the quality being a human being, then that means that there are rights and obligations that attach to that dignity, and that dignity entails that I cannot do certain things to you without breaking the moral law. It's true that children have lower ability, and it's not just children. It's invalids, the poor, the very elderly, and so on and so forth. And your point about how yanking someone's chain is different between adults because everyone is in on it. It's part of the fun. Everybody accepts it, and so on. But that's something that children don't understand. Is very well taken. That I think that's exactly right. But it's because you recognize children's full dignity as human beings that you also recognize a duty not to yank their chain because they're not equipped to give it as good as they get, or they're not equipped to differentiate between yanking a chain and joking and being lied to and being misled. So I don't see an inconsistency there at all.
Well, I think that as parents, helping to show kids the difference is important, and I think that that's one avenue. Like the story with my dad and the shrink ray, and and I just think of and that's how I think of the Santa story as well.
I joke with my kid all the time. I have a very sort of I forget what the word is in English, deadpan sense of humor. And I love doing that. But she's in on the joke. There was a time when my daughter was much smaller. She was supposed to get a piece of chocolate for something or the other. And she said, "Can I get my piece of chocolate?" And I said, "No." And I was joking because I had promised it to her. But she didn't get that because she was really small and she started crying completely. And I was like, "Oh, crap."
Those as parents are only humans too. Sometimes.
Right. No, but the point is when you make a joke and somebody takes it too seriously or doesn't get that you're joking, the next thing you do is say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I was joking." It it That's how you know that Santa is not a joke. Because if Santa was equivalent of yanking someone's chain or a joke, you would say, "Hey, did you know that your Christmas gifts were delivered here by a fat man?" And the kid goes, "Oh, really? That's very interesting, Dad. Tell me more." You don't say, "Oh, no, I'm sorry, I was joking." No, you go on with the manipulation. So it's not the same thing as yanking someone's chain or joking around with them or something like that. It is manipulation. It's deliberately misleading another human being for shits and giggles. And that's a human being to whom you have a special duty because they've been entrusted to you. A prank, doing a harmless prank on one of your college mates isn't the same thing because you don't have a special duty to your college mates. But that there's no other box to put it in, and that's a box labeled immoral.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure how much further we can pursue this because I think at the end of the day, there's sort of like a fundamental disagreement about, I guess, the nature of honesty or where the line is. But I will say that in your daughter's case, she was crying. There was a definite it hurt her feelings kind of thing. Whereas with my father in the shrink ray, which by the way I don't think he ever admitted wasn't actually ever actually said wasn't real to this day, but I'm pretty sure it was a lie. Pretty sure.
Who knows?
Um, and with Santa, um, there isn't an emotional harm there. You know, the possibility that it could be mishandled and there could be a side, as you said. Um, for the most part, um, it's I think it's a part of the healthy process of being able to become the kind of person who can josh around. I'm not saying it's necessary, but it can be part of that process. Um, and I really think, at least the way that it was handled in my life, um, was a joy for me as the child, not the parent. Um, and it's a joy that I very much intend to share with my children someday. Um, I knew that we were probably going to agree to disagree at the end of this discussion, but thank you for the.
That's okay. I don't win converts every single time.
Not every single time, and likewise.
All right.
Pleasure talking to you.
It was a pleasure talking to you. I don't have any final words because I think I've made my case pretty fully. But this was lovely. Thanks for doing this. At least I'm generating discussion. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.